plan. I mean, we got 7-state operator. Like,
yeah. We shouldn't have lost. Hey, Nate, did you get, I sent you access to those questions last night. Did that not go through?
Yeah, I'm all set. I got him.
I got it.
Okay. I just haven't had a minute to circle back with you yet. Yeah, that whole process, my business partner didn't win, and her license, and she's a Black attorney in Chicago, and her family's been in Illinois forever, and she's very reputable, very well respected, ran for alderman. Even one of her sorority sisters is alderman in her district. Yeah. So it's just kind of strange that she more than qualifies. Her application had a combined 100 years experience in cannabis. You know what I mean? Compliance, social equity, all of it.
And the reality is that, honestly, I mean, there's a ton of great applications. There's a ton of great groups. There's a ton of great everything. And, as long as we're going to continually have these states that have such a small, tiny cap on applications in the first place, and also make it so that, the application process is so intense, you're always going to have this. It's just like there's always, there's a lot of great candidates, of course, because it's so competitive and you only have 75 that you're awarding in the first place. So even if, we go ahead and say, all the folks that were close win, we're still leaving a whole ton of people out. And then that's not even including the people that, scored lower that really could do just fine running a dispensary, but maybe didn't have what it took to get the application to be what the application is, because that's a whole nother thing. So,
Yes.
That's
exactly.
One of the biggest frustrations is if the policy objective is to create new generational wealth for as many people impacted negatively by the war on cannabis leading up until its legalization, then why are there 10 people winning 85% of the lottery? Right. On 75 applications? Like, the scoring methodology for all of these great applications should be to try to take those top 5 to 10% of social equity applicants, but give them enough, differentiation in the range. It's just, to me, really impossible to get to a point where everybody has perfect scores, except if you don't have a perfect score and you're in the 98th percentile, 99th percentile, you just don't even get considered, or you don't win. And most other states, it's more gradient than that. It's much more nuanced. You get, out of 1,200 points, you'll get 1158, and you'll still be qualified enough to get an application. Yep. So that's, I think, one of the big areas and kind of lessons learned and looking back on this. It was one of my initial fears when we did our NCIA panel, Mike, that your tiebreaker is a toss of a coin. It's only 2 points on that Illinois app. So it is kind of sad and disappointing to see how it shook out. But yeah, Larissa, I'll turn it over to you. I think you got to.
Are we ready? Are there people?
I think there are. I think we're good to go. Good to go, and there's people in the room.
Awesome. Welcome. Hi, folks. Thank you for joining us on our social equity panel. My name is Larissa Bolivar. I have 20 years in cannabis in a variety of capacities. Self-made, pretty successful. I've been working on social equity. I have probably $250,000 invested in social equity, including my master's degree, $100,000 there. My master's thesis was Enduring Racial Disparity After Cannabis Legalization, published in 2016. It took me about 3 years to research it, and I've been working in social equity in a variety of capacities. I'm joined with an amazing group of people. I've been getting to know these guys for a while now, and just very excited to have them introduce themselves. I will go ahead and have them introduce themselves, and then we'll just go right into the panel. Mark, if you want to start with your brief background.
Yeah, my name is Mark Slaw. I'm CEO and founder of iComply. Been involved in cannabis since about 2008, 2009, originally focused on ending the war on drugs and really getting into it for social justice. I think the war against cannabis is abysmal and certainly isn't helping anybody. It's hurting a lot more people than it helps. So from that perspective, started working in cannabis in the early days, realized pretty quickly that converting from an underground traditional market into more of a legitimate profession was going to be a challenge for a lot of people. And if we were going to include those people, they would need help with the education required to run one of these cannabis businesses. And so I founded iComply, which is the oldest cannabis compliance company in the world, to help people through compliance. and through the boring, resistant things that nobody wants to do, but that are fundamentally important to being successful in this business. I've run industry associations, was also the Southern Colorado Regional Coordinator for Amendment 64. And for 2 years, I served as the government consultant for the island territory of Puerto Rico, where I got to write the first free market marijuana model in Spanish and implement one of the fastest implemented models, from publishing regulations to first patients having medicine in 6 months. And it was a great experiment to kind of put some of the policy work and things that we're doing into play for social equity, where 51% of the ownership had to be in the hands of Puerto Ricans. So since then, been working pretty successfully and hard in Latin America, trying to get as much medicine at an affordable price out to as many patients as possible as they start to transition entire countries. Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Uruguay, Colombia, Brazil are all kind of where I'm at. I speak Portuguese and Spanish, and being half Brazilian, this issue is very important to me. And I also serve on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee for NCIA and their Policy Council, the National Cannabis Industry Association, along with Mike Lamoto, who's joining us here today as well. So thanks for listening in and having us, and look forward to a good conversation.
So Nate, I'm going in order of how I see people. Nate, if you could introduce yourself.
How you guys doing today? My name is Nate Wilson. I am currently in Colorado. I came here in 2013. When I first came here, me and a team in Parnsville started a company that we purchased a grow, a store, and a marijuana nip kitchen. And through that, we created multiple brands throughout the years. I led a lot of effort as far as like extraction techniques. We were one of the first marijuana infused production facilities that had hydrocarbon extraction approved by the state and city. Through there, we launched a couple of brands. One brand went to multiple states. Over the years, my experience, I ended up helping a lot of companies out doing consulting work, helping them with marketing, advertising, sales. Then throughout the years, I changed my structure to the business, became the owner of Clearview Industries, where we do different techniques of solventless and solventless products. Through over the years now, I've pretty much been established since 2013 and worked ever since that day, ever since day one. And now I'm focusing on mainly just one core brand that I have a passion for. And my goal is to pretty much take that brand to multiple states and still do consulting in the industry and help other brands out that don't have the benefits of knowing how to move and get through regulations in Colorado and other legalized states.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. Mike, you're up.
All right, cool. Mike Lamudo here. I started my cannabis experience, going back over 20 years now. I grew up in San Francisco in the industry, and my dad was a patient from the time I was a little kid, and I kind of just segued my way into the industry as a teenager. I guess for the last 8 years now, I've been, about 8 years ago, we made a decision to really transition into the regulated space. It's been quite a journey over the last several years. Really started in San Francisco. It's taken me to Oklahoma, and I'm now in Chicago and Illinois right now. I have a consulting firm, Dow Mastery. We do coaching and consulting and mentoring for cannabis businesses, especially legacy operators and social equity operators that have a foothold in the industry, but are really trying to make sure that they can keep and expand that foothold in the industry. Last year, we launched an accelerator for social equity applicants. We piloted it in Chicago, but the goal is to take it national online. And the goal there is really to help social equity operators and legacy operators, really people that are just trying to get into the industry and get their foothold to begin with. And our focus is on ancillary and really creating ancillary companies. So that's my background. And as Mark mentioned, I work with them on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee for the NCIA. Thank you. That's
perfect. I'm glad you mentioned ancillary markets, because I think it's really important for us to advocate that that's an excellent area for people of color to get into the cannabis space without having to find capital with very little overhead. So, thank you guys for your introductions. Policymakers are increasingly opening cannabis markets with social equity in mind. Those most impacted by the war on drugs have been systematically left out of the opportunity at generational wealth in the new multi-billion marketplace, and the scales are balancing. While many cannabis social equity conversations focus on the problems in policy, this panel of activists, advocates, and academics is focused on solutions from lessons learned and how to best implement social equity, inclusion, and diversity policies nationally and in both emerging and developed cannabis markets. Mark, we're going to start with you again. I'm just going in the order of how I see people. The adult use industry has had a 7-year head start, and considering first movers advantage, the inherent issues of competition, and states with social equity laws like California, Massachusetts, and Illinois failing to meet expectations, how should social equity be approached moving forward?
I mean, I think the number one thing we have to look at is government involvement, sort of getting industry to jump on board. I think most people think it's in the detrimental of their own self-interest to give up any sort of position of privilege or power, and we can't expect necessarily that the industry is going to do this on their own. It's sort of the carrot or the stick question. But what we've seen so far is nice attempts, good ideas in theory that we shouldn't throw away. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I definitely think grant funding, like Illinois has done for social equity applicants, is huge because, like you mentioned, we can't always get access to capital to be able to start a marijuana business. We're talking about $100 to $200 a square foot build out. The barriers to entry are pretty high just to get in the industry. Then what happens when you don't have your own money, but you're a qualified veteran, resident, black or brown person living in the right neighborhood that could have an opportunity at this business? The second problem we run into is knowing how to negotiate those operating agreements and ending up in predatory arrangements with people that move forward. So great idea that we include those types of people, that we are inclusive, that we give extra points and preference to people of color and people that have had suffering in the war on drugs, or family members of theirs have been absent or missing because they were locked up during the war on drugs. But we're missing a little bit of a component to bridge the gap in terms of this sort of predatory tactics that take place, where you sign somebody up, but they don't really own anything because they never showed up to the table with anything except for who they are. So I think the grant funding is important. I think that we look at solutions like preference and merit-based point systems. I think we need more licenses. Illinois could use way more than 75. We have 2 million people here in Denver, and we have 300 dispensaries that all operate at multi-million dollars a year, versus Chicago, which has 10 million people and only 40-something dispensaries that have been approved. So there's always opportunity. California has the same problem to open up more marketplace, right? To open up more possibilities, especially on retail and delivery for people of color, because traditionally we've been the ones selling it and getting in trouble for it. So I think that's an important concept to keep in mind. But unless we bridge that gap of showing up to the table with no capital, it's hard to be listened to and not end up in a predatory situation. So I think one of the solutions that I'd like to see to answer your question on some of these failures, learning those lessons, is the first thing is to pre-approve social equity applicants, not just based on who they are, but pre-approve them for low interest loans and grant funding that they then can walk to the table, right, and say, I have all this money that's already been approved by the government to be able to give to me when I apply. And now I get to pick and choose which multi-state operator I should join. It gives more power for an equal playing field, I think, between operator and social equity applicant in some of these new states.
Excellent. All excellent points. I've definitely seen my fair share of these bad agreements, and I do think we can be stepping it up more on the government side. Nate, with all of our expectations not having been met, what do you think would be best approaches for social equity moving forward?
Yeah, I want to piggyback off what Mark said, and the grant access, having approval for loans is a good way to kind of get to that door of trying to get a license, trying to get approvals to be an owner. And I think why that is because right now the gap between the wealth and people that are running most of the industry today are coming from big money like Wall Street money, comes from real estate money, comes from farmer now is getting involved. So when you have that kind of skew of that gap between minorities and big corporations like that are able to get to the front door, win raffles, and own right away, it's definitely skewed up. So I think, like, just giving them the access to make sure you're approved through different, different ways through the government and through legalization. But having grants, having loans, having money, saying I have money as well too, but I'm also qualified as well. I think those are the first beginning steps to even get to that door, because we know that the reason why there isn't social equality is because of this money. I mean, that's pretty much what it is, and not everybody comes from the same foundation in the country to really get to their front door without having the access to money. So what Mark said is totally 100% right. I think we start there with the grants, with approval for loans, and then from there, qualifications, some kind of guideline to help others that don't have that benefit of having financial backing or financial support to get to their front door to be able to access to licenses and ownership.
It's all very good points. It's so true. We all are pretty much struggling within this. Mike, how about you? What do you think are going to be good approaches moving forward to address social equity?
Yeah, thanks. I think, again, everything that Mark and Nate here are saying is spot on. I think that, building in the access to capital on the front end, I think, is definitely an important thing. Make a lot of those, like Mark said, all those conversations a lot easier to have, so you're not in a hard rock between a rock and a hard place when you're trying to negotiate those contracts. Another couple things to note here, and I think Illinois is trying to do something in this direction. I'm not sure, we're not sure yet how it's going to work out, but creating almost like the ability for something closer to cottage style, I think, is also something good to kind of allow people to get their foot in the door. So as Mark mentioned, the barrier to entry is, $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is, in order to be able to get a facility up and running and licensed and compliant. But there's a lot of things that could be done in those regulations to allow for whether it's more of a cottage industry or more of a collaborative industry. I know in Oakland that they now are doing I believe, a social equity cooperative kitchen type of a model, like an incubator model. So brands can come out of that. That wasn't baked into the regulations originally. So things like that can be baked into regulations that can allow for people to start out small in the industry and then grow bigger without having to sell the whole cow to a multi-state operator in a bad agreement. The other thing to note that I would say is that we often are pushing fast on the overall regulations, and then nobody really knows what to do about social equity. So a lot of things get kind of dragged along, and it's kind of slow moving, and then rush through at the last minute in order to match up with the regulation. So I think that maybe I know that the pressures that be might make this a little bit difficult, but slowing the regulations down a little bit and allowing the social equity stuff to kind of take a little bit more hold and have more conversation and have more strategy built in, I think could really be helpful. So that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Awesome.
I think I just want to say I love that point about slowing it down. If we weren't in such a rush to just get the thing up as quick as possible, right? Or if we, I did appreciate Illinois didn't have to make you hold on to the property waiting around for approval, right? Because that might bankrupt a lot of people. And the micro business is a good idea. But what's the other thing we're lacking besides just capital? Education about the opportunity in the first place. We don't take the time for the government to incentivize private industry or for themselves to educate communities of color. And I mean, showing up at Black churches. I mean, showing up at bodegas with information about this, saying, hey, come over here and learn about this opportunity for new generational wealth for you and your family that hasn't been there before, especially if you're a veteran, you've been impacted by the war on drugs, whatever the other criteria there is. We don't slow down and take the time to educate our communities about this possibility, right? It goes right over our head, and the people with capital, with resources, with connections end up monopolizing a lot of this opportunity because they know better. They're already in the game. They're paying attention at a level that's different than, hey, well, how am I going to pay my bills next week? And how am I going to struggle and survive, right? But it's those people that are most impacted by prohibition on cannabis that we should be doing outreach to. And if we took just that extra 6 months for everybody to maybe learn together, it wouldn't be as homogenized and perhaps be a little more inclusive. By the time we roll around application deadlines, open this up, have pre-approved folks with good relations now, because those MSOs can be going to these community engagement events and learning about each other and picking the right people for the team to create that new opportunity of generational wealth.
Yes, absolutely. Community organizing is a huge component of this. It's been my experience in California and other big markets that without community organizing, there is no social equity. And there's a lot of distrust in our communities because we have been historically targeted in this drug war. And so when people are coming up to us offering I hate to use this term, 40 horses and a mule, but that's basically what we've been offered. We can, there's a lot of distrust. And so we have to take those considerations, and we have to slow it down in order to consider those very critical components. And that's a great segue into the next question. What has been your experience, Mark, as a person of color in cannabis, and what recommendations do you make to others interested in pursuing a career in cannabis or who are already current business owners?
I run across ambitious people of color all the time and kind of magnetize to each other because I see myself in them when I started. And one thing that I'll say is what it's been like is no matter who you try to work with as leaders, it tends to be still somewhat disconnected. So even though I'm working with people out here in Colorado that helped make Colorado what it is and influence all other markets, it's more like how can I serve them or how can they capitalize on my efforts, not how we can lift each other up or do something together. So I think it's been a real struggle. Would be my answer, because it's been hard to have anybody with a background of relatedness that knows where I've come from, what I've been through, or why this matters to me to do it for everyone else. So when I do run across people of color that are trying to get into the industry, that magnetization generally happens, and it looks like, hey, I'll help you out. If you need anything, give me a call. I normally charge $4.20 an hour, but for these folks, if it's really somebody who wants to help, wants to do something that matters, and there's an alignment there and a vibe, then I'll do what I can to help them help themselves, right? I think that's really important, and maybe the message I would give is look for other people who share your same values, and look for people that want to lift you up and be willing to lift others up. It's not about what you can just get from somebody, what you can build on the backs of someone else. So that would be my advice, and based on kind of what I've been through and what it's been like.
Awesome. Nate, how about you? What's been your experience as a person of color in cannabis, and what advice do you have to give to others?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I've seen both sides of the industry as far as being an owner, and also being part of a group that was financially supported. And when I first came here, we had a group of partners and people, investors, that that was the kind of how you start any business in America. We have that backing, you have support, you have some heavy money that comes from others that are just collaborating. And when I came here, I was part of that group, and so when I started the store, started to grow, started to MIP, it was easy to get funding because I had that kind of backing. And through the years, when I needed something done, there was no problem. Make a phone call, I can get money, just more investment. And that pretty much is how it is structured right now. That's why a lot of these companies are having success, because they have so much, backing. They can make mistakes and still have backing no matter what they do. When I became an owner, and I kind of left that group and everybody went their separate ways, I came independent. Now I'm an owner, but I don't have that backing no more. I have that support no more. And so the struggle got real, got more, I had more struggles because, I didn't have that safety net that most people have when they come into the industry or any industry. So I was able to learn that, okay, I got to do something different because I don't have that so-called, that support that would get me success that I want to. So for me, and I recommend is that I just use innovation. I said, okay, let me try to, create something that no one has, that no one's doing, and let that be the face of what I am. So I created a brand that no one had, no one knew what it was, and then I made that the face. So you'll buy the brand because of what it is. Innovating, it's new, it's fresh, it's clean. Not knowing who's behind this. I wouldn't say, hey, Nate Wilson, the minority. I would not use my name to push the brand because I thought maybe it would affect the brand. And that was me subconsciously from my, my experience in life that, maybe that would hurt the brand. And obviously that's something that is, from my past, and that's only my own faults that I have that mentality. But the goal was to make sure that I had something that they couldn't deny. And when I had that, I got sales. I was able to, have some success. But there's no way I was ever to get that wealth still. That wealth status is something that is not achievable when you're at a certain mark in the industry. So even though I could pay the bills, I could have a decent life, but to get that wealth that we're seeing in marijuana, like that reach is a hard thing to go by without having that financial support. So people that are getting into it now understand that you got to have a great plan, a great strategy, something that they can't deny, no matter your race, no matter how you look. And for me, I use that as my engine. And then when you're in the door, then you start doing other things. But I think just because how competitive it is and how the skills are not balanced, you got to create something that's not common to get your name out there and get your face out there. And then when you're in there, you're part of the industry. But it definitely is not an easy task. Last 7 years has been, I've seen every last aspect of the industry, good and bad. So it's definitely something that we got to work on. We got to get better with it. I think this kind of conversations, like everybody's having these discussions now. It's more a lot about kind of the not having this even balance. And I think we got to forget. We're not talking about to make sure we have an opportunity that's better than others. We just want to have an equal opportunity, have just a balance across the board. And once we have that, then we can start seeing results from people that don't have the opportunities to get success out here in the industry.
Excellent. Mike, what about you? What advice do you have for folks in the industry or interested in getting in the industry who are people of color?
Right. So, and I think this goes to, people of color, anybody that really feels at times disadvantaged, maybe for whatever reason, or is disadvantaged. I think that the advice is always, what do you have? Where are your strengths? What are your advantages? Right. And so, kind of what, really to look at what Nate's saying and what Mark is saying, right? With Nate, it's like, look, like, I'm going to go ahead and figure out what can I do to stand out, right? What Mark is saying with, about giving rather than just taking, same thing. Where can you be strong? What can you contribute and be collaborative with, right? Because, and not be so hung up on whether you can get a license or not, whether you have capital or not, right? That's why I think that, what Mark did with creating iComply, he created a company that isn't reliant on getting a license or not. And so sometimes, we have to give up on maybe the initial thought or dream or whatever of getting that license right away, and think more creatively and innovatively and adaptively about what can I do right now? How can I be in this conversation and not just on the sideline? Because if you take what you're strong at and you get into the industry that way, you can build from there. And maybe it might take 5 years until you get your license if you even end up needing one to build that well. But you might just say, hey, I have a great marketing company now and I'm making money and I have clients and I don't need a license anymore. Or you might be able to parlay that into a license through relationships and being a part of that industry. So I think the main thing I would say is, just what are you good at? Where are your strengths? Where are your advantages? And don't worry about what you don't have and what you don't have connections to, and so on and so forth.
That's an excellent point. I also want to touch on that a lot of people were impacted by the war on drugs. Yes, people in color, but having 20 years in this space, having started as an activist, having been an activist for almost 30 years, those that I inherited the hat from were who I would call OGs, who had spent a considerable amount of money moving the needle forward and building the well. And this was Black and Brown and hippie movement originally. And we all shared in those resources. And then somehow the establishment that we were protesting against captured cannabis. And we're all working together. Social equity is a national endeavor spanning all markets. So this is a great time to be in this space. And then, just bringing up the market differentiators. Innovation is very critical, Nate. Reaching out for like-minded folks, Mark. In my case, I can speak to the success of ancillary market work. I've been consulting. I literally have to turn my phone off and go hide on an island. That's how much business I get. And I'm not bragging. I've been in the space for a long time. I used to be an operator. I was shut out by regulations. This is why I fight social equity. But I manage over $1 million in assets, and I built my wealth on my own consulting and investing. And I have other sources of revenues, and this is very critical that I want to add for folks who are, getting into cannabis, that if you don't have all the resources and access to capital from the beginning, be creative, find other sources of revenue, get that side hustle and keep that side hustle. I have real estate investments, I have other projects going on, and they don't pay a lot of money, but they pay enough to help keep me in the game. And so, but never underestimate the ancillary market. I now have a hemp business, a product manufacturer. I qualify as a social equity candidate. I paid for the social equity bill to pass through the state house last minute so that I could qualify as a social equity candidate to create a broad definition to do that. But that now means I can qualify for a license, and that's now 25 years. Really active in this space, 20 years in the front lines, and it's just now taking me to get around to get a license. And I'm okay. My ego is fine. Just make sure that you know and are confident that this is a long game, and we're all here to help. I also give free services. I think all of us are here to help people succeed in this space.
And it's hard not to be frustrated, Marissa, just to add in, years and years and years of work, and then to watch some of these companies after we've sort of dug the well, squander the water, right, and burn through $79 million a quarter. I mean, just insane with nothing there that is profitable. So I just want to acknowledge that point too, because as people of color trying to be in something we've loved probably for a long time, we've worked hard for, to watch people squander the water of the well we dug is really frustrating too. Especially to Nate's point, where necessity is the mother of invention. When you've got to be innovative, you've got to work harder, right? You don't have the money to be somewhat lazy with it and let it just wash away. So, this is the other side of that point about what the experience kind of feels like watching it through the way the industry is developed.
It's very heartbreaking. I actually, I was harassed out of my dispensary, by the way, by law enforcement. I was raided, all of this, and then the regulations came out. But I was a DNR of a patient. Her name was Sandra, and I lost her to the new regs, and she ended up killing herself because she went from having me by her side, taking her to her doctor's appointments, sitting through her doctor's appointments because she had no family and no money, to going to a dispensary in a very homogenized, non-caring fashion. And it's very upsetting. And, we're not going to belabor this issue, but we're all coming at this from real hard experience, hardships, and we want real solutions, and that's the point of this panel. And with that, I want to really touch on this subject. Mark, starting with you, social equity in cannabis is an opportunity to build lasting economic wealth and security for people of color and others harmed by the war on drugs. What recommendations do you have towards solidifying and maximizing this wealth opportunity?
Yeah, I think this is very similar to the first question about sort of lessons learned. But what I'll add is governments have to stop looking at limited marketplaces on too fine a limit, right? When Missouri, with no social equity program, gave out many, many more licenses than Illinois did with a social equity program, giving 50% to minorities. But now if you look at the numbers breakdowns, those major 10 groups that have submitted more than 10 applications have, out of 21 that qualified, those 10 groups are going to win, have an 85% chance of winning all the licenses available. I mean, it's not equitable, right? Just period, because of more wealth or more ability to do something. So I think what states have to start looking at is not how can I choose the right 5 minority groups for these licenses, right? Or we like these particular people. But if we take the time to educate, we take the time to set the goal, the policy objective should start being, how can we create as many opportunities for a free market competitive space for as many minorities as possible and from as many people impacted by the war on drugs? So we took that approach on those 75 licenses. You'd probably see something like 40 or 50 applicants that qualify to win a license, right, out of 75 available, or at least 30, 40, somewhere in that range. So I think that's kind of the things we need to start looking at, and not be afraid to add more dispensaries to our neighborhood as normalization happens. Because the more people you lock out of participating in the legitimate market, the more people will stay on the underground market, right? And more people are still going to go to jail and get in trouble for that. So I think that was, part of our considerations in Puerto Rico in terms of solidifying and capitalizing that. We were wanting to incentivize black market growers to become legitimate by allowing them in. So one of the things we did was not say you have to start with seeds or clones. We said you can start with fully flowering plants. As long as that fully flowered plant passes testing, the next day you should be able to sell that to a patient, right, if that underground grower was growing. So we ended up getting 4 of the largest growers in Puerto Rico to go legit. And they sold all of their crop to the new entity, and that entity now had a social equity minority person with an asset that they could bring to the table, which were hundreds of illegal plants, right? that then overnight could become legal plants as long as they pass testing. So it set them on a little bit more equal playing ground, and then you shave off 6 months of your policy development and your market development because those products are now ready overnight for patients. So I think those are some of the innovative things we can look at as solutions too that have worked in other markets to try to create more of an equal playing field and incentivize more participation. And as long as we take that objective of how many people can we include that are good, that are going to be able to be qualified to do the job to create new opportunities for generational wealth, those are definitely some things I'd like to see moving forward to solidify that.
Awesome. So, Nate, how about yourself? What solution, or how do you think that the cannabis industry, or how do you envision the cannabis industry creating economic security and wealth within our communities?
That's a good question that I kind of went back with a couple of times when I thought about this. I think to Mark's point is giving the opportunity first to how do you get a ownership license and just equaling out that balance of how it is right now. But once you are involved, and I think the one thing is getting support from the community as far as if I sell a product or if another business that is minority owned sells a product, we put that in the store and we advertise, hey, this is minority owned, and support so-called black businesses, but support minority owned businesses, and that that being advertised through the government through advertising and marketing, that would help our success as far as like getting our numbers from owning a brand out to the masses. And I think like once you see and I think for me when I do see other brands that are out there that I do know minority owned, I know their story. Usually it's a hard story. It's usually that they didn't get there overnight. They didn't get there from just like hey, I'm a cool guy, I can buy my stuff. They had a battle. So when you see a brand that's minority owned, supporting that is only just saying, hey, I want to just congratulate you on just your success. And I think once we have people that collaborate together and get on shelves and promote that, hey, these guys are minority-owned businesses and brands, that support will turn to wealth eventually. I think, for my view, owning a brand, having that collaboration and just expressing, hey, listen, we working hard to really get out here and really get part of this lovely industry you all love. I think that by doing something like that, or something where you're supporting other companies and purchasing wholesale or retail, I think we'll see a wealth change inside between other brands that are not minority owned.
Excellent. Mike, how about yourself? What do you think can be done to create lasting economic wealth and security within the cannabis space?
Yeah, so we could probably talk for 10 hours on that one, right? I really appreciate what Mark and Nate said again here too. Nate, with collaboration, I think collaboration is definitely key. And that means collaboration, as Mark's pointing out, collaboration with regulators and policymakers and the voters and the public and the companies collaborating with each other. Collaboration, I think, is something that in our country, we operate a lot from a scarcity mindset. And so, wealth isn't created based on a scarcity mindset. It's created because we realize there's an abundance of wealth out there that we can basically create and develop and grow with. And so I think if we approach it from that perspective, which is why, again, I come back to that ancillary mindset, right? Ancillary businesses, to Larissa's and Mark's and Nate's companies here, they can all interact now, right? If they were all just doing the same exact thing, where's the collaboration, right? But I know you guys have been collaborating in Colorado, and a big part of that is because you do different things. And so again, when it comes to wealth, wealth is a long play. And like Nate said, the brands that you do see out there, they've been in it for a long time, and it's taken a long time. So the one piece that I would say as far as what to do to create wealth is really, collaborate, think long term. You're going to be frustrated, you're going to be mad, you're going to be upset, you're going to be sad, you're going to be, despondent, all these things. And realize that that's okay. It's part of the journey, and that's the only way you really do create wealth in this country and probably anywhere, is to be in it for the long game and to rely on your strengths and to rely on others and to move together and be okay with things not always working out perfectly. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Excellent. And I really like touching on the scarcity versus abundance, because that took me a real long time to learn. My dad immigrated here from Peru running away from the drug war there. And my family has been really focused on just survival, and we're just now starting to build wealth in this country. And I struggle myself. At first, I struggled with the abundance theory. What does that mean? What does that even look like? And I realized when I launched Bolivar Hemp Company in a new industry, what exactly that looked like. It was hard raising money as a consultant because it's not a product, it's a service, and but when you have a product, it changes the game. And now I've got the issue of investors beating down my door because there is a lot of money out there, especially when you look at things like hemp. And we're talking about cannabis here. Cannabis is hemp. It's just a nomenclature issue. And that's a broader market. And when you look at the economic impact, the total economic impact of hemp is in the trillions because you're touching so many industries. It's so nebulous, it's hard to even quantify. Once we start realizing that we can each start our own brand, all of us here in attendance, all 15 of us can start our own brand, and there's so much of a pie, and there's so many investors out there who want a piece of that pie, you start realizing the difference between scarcity and abundance. We all as folks struggling to survive have to fight over crumbs, and it's a total injustice to have that mindset. And we really truly don't even know because we're not exposed to this Wall Street world when we're growing up. We're not exposed to anything but getting a job, paying those bills, if even that's possible. My mom worked 2 jobs to get that accomplished. My dad paid child support. I grew up in the DC area with all my family working so hard just so that I could have somewhat of a life. There's a lot of pressure on us. But there is abundance in this country. There's a lot of abundance in this country, and if we just look at that, there's so much we can achieve with that. So we have a few minutes left, and I want to leave some time for questions, but I want us to summarize and wrap this up with, Mark, if you can start with, if you have any more, maybe 3 solutions that we haven't discussed or any other closing thoughts that you would like to add.
I think just takeaway wise, governments, and I hope to influence this with NCIA and our policy papers, which go to a lot of governments making these decisions, because this has just never been done before, right? These conversations are so new and so innovative, and that's what gives me the juice on it. I love seeing, 3.5 million Puerto Ricans be able to access medical cannabis and for people to create new opportunities for themselves in that. So I think the first thing is, how do we create the most for the most amount of people? Sort of, if we're going to be doing this altruistically, try to balance the scales, then we need to give more opportunities, more licenses, and focus on a policy objective that allows more people to participate. Micro-level businesses, all of that kind of maybe falls under that umbrella. I think the second thing is we need to make sure that there's government-sponsored education opportunities for networking to bring white-collar and black, brown collars together so that people can have the opportunity